When the university, tired of being beaten up on the issue, changed the discussion from First Amendment to personnel, the most notable result was organizations that were in the process of making statements on my behalf backed off. Those included SPJ and AEJMC. I'm happy to say that the Student Press Law Center and the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education have stuck with me and continue to work with me and stay in touch. I don't have a lot of confidence that ECU administrators really knew what they were doing, but whether they did or not, it was a really effective PR maneuver. While ECU has only ever said to me that I was fired so the university could take student media in a new direction, it implied to the media that I was fired for some sort of secret personnel reason that they just loved to tell everybody, but sadly couldn't because A, it's a personnel issue, and B, I won't sign a waiver no one in their right mind would sign. Which leads me back around to the real issue that I was asked to speak about, and that's the First Amendment, which was and my main argument to ECU involved the First Amendment. My termination violates the UNC system policy preventing firing for speech issues because first and most fundamentally, the role of an advisor to collegiate student media is not that of a super editor or publisher. I did not and should not exercise editorial control or influence over what was published in the East Carolinian. My role as an advisor to the East Carolinian was, among other things, to make students aware of what their rights are and to weigh the ethical considerations of publication, not to tell them what to publish or what not to publish. Second, had I, as an employee of a state university and a representative of the government, imposed some restriction on what was published, that exercise would have been unconstitutional prior restraint. The Supreme Court has held in Bantam Books Incorporated versus Sullivan, any system of prior restraint of expression comes to this court bearing a heavy presumption against its constitutional validity. The Fourth Circuit has applied that specific principle to college newspapers. If a college has a student newspaper, its publication cannot be suppressed because college officials dislike its editorial comment. That's from Joyner versus Whiting in 1973. The administration of ECU has made multiple statements that I was not fired as a result of the publication of the streaker photos in the East Carolinian, but for other reasons, such as the university wanting to go in a new direction, that sort of thing. However, a review of my personnel file and consideration of my employment history prior to the publication of the photos compels a different conclusion. That the publication of the nude photos was the impetus for my firing, which unquestionably violates my First Amendment rights. The U.S. Supreme Court in two key cases set out and refined the test for determining whether a public employee can be fired in violation of his or her constitutional rights. Garcetti versus Ceballos and Pickering versus Board of Education established these factors. 1, whether the speech was made in pursuant to an employee's official duties. 2, whether the speech was on a matter of public concern. 3, whether the government's interests as employer in promoting the efficiency of the public service outweigh the plaintiff's free speech interests. 4, whether the protected speech was a motivating factor in the adverse employment. And 5, whether the defendant would have reached the same employment decision in the absence of the protected conduct. Applying the Pickering-Garcetti test leads to a conclusion that my termination violated my constitutional rights. And I'll address several of the factors. Publication of the streaker photos was not a part of my official duties. I didn't make the decision to publish the photos. That decision was made by the students. However, it is clear that the decision is being attributed to me, which led to my unconstitutional termination. The photos did address a matter of public concern, interruption of a military honor ceremony during an official ECU event. But no compelling government interest is served by quelling that speech. Though the streaker incident itself was both disruptive and disrespectful, the November 8th edition of the East Carolinian was not disruptive to the efficient operation of the university. University officials engaged in multiple meetings about the matter and tasked employees to commit significant time and resources to research on issues such as prior restraint, the university's role and rights related to pulling the newspapers, obscenity, and how similar situations were handled at other universities. Multiple statements illustrate that the university needed to avoid a First Amendment fight, tacitly admitting that my rights were indeed violated. Regarding the motivation prong of the test, courts evaluate the timing of the protected activity and the retaliatory action. Proximity and time coupled with evidence of employer opposition to the employee's speech is significant, while long delays between the challenged speech and the adverse employment suggest a lack of a causal link. Here, the link is direct and nearly immediate. The photos were published November 8th. Records indicate that following a flurry of activity, administrators decided to fire me at least by Friday, November the 18th, when my supervisor met with Human Resources to discuss the issue. Less than 2 months later, I was terminated. The university's argument that my termination was not related to the publication of the nude photos and the ensuing perceived negative publicity is at best disingenuous. Nothing in my personnel history or personnel file suggests a similar outcome for me before the publication of the streak of photos. My files contain minor criticisms, but I consistently received good evaluations through the formal evaluation process. When balancing an employer's real motivation against the employee's constitutional rights, courts have asked whether the employer's stated reason for a termination is actually a pretext for an unconstitutional firing. A pretext can be inferred from the stated reasons if the employee can demonstrate, quote, such weaknesses, implausibilities, inconsistencies, incoherencies, or contradictions in the employer's proffered legitimate reasons for its action that a reasonable fact finder find them unworthy of credence, close quote. That quote from Combs versus Plantation Patterns describes my situation exactly. The university's stated reasons for terminating me simply are not supported by the timing of my termination, the flurry of activity that took place following the publication of the photos, and my employment history since July of 2008. Rather, the facts indicate that the university was embarrassed by the negative publicity it received as a result of the students' decision to publish the nude photos and was determined to exact a pound of flesh. I was the easiest target. Here's the latest. A UNC system employee, an exempt employee like myself, which exempt means that they can fire me at will, can request a review of their termination if they think they were fired in violation of the First Amendment. With help of 2 attorneys, I filed a request for review March 1st based on evidence from thousands of pages of personnel file material. ECU has formed a review committee which is in the process of deciding whether or not to grant the review. If it decides to review my firing, it will make a recommendation to the Chancellor about whether to reinstate me, and the Chancellor can abide by the committee's recommendation or not. It continues to be a long, drawn-out process with no end in sight. I appreciate the people and the organizations that have continued to support me. Thanks for inviting me to speak today. I first presented at the Southeast Colloquium in Gainesville in 1995, just a year after graduate school. So it's nice to be back, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.